but let me go ahead and go through this. Well, you know, we call ourselves the Northwest Coaches Connect. The funny thing is that we are no longer coaches in the Northwest, as we have individuals who are joining us throughout the country. And we are really excited about that. But we do connect, and we meet once a month, and we want to provide you with the opportunity to get some great training while we are together. As Carl mentioned earlier, if you didn't catch that on the recording, I trust somebody's recording this. that would make my comments earlier a little bit. All right, well, great. But Carl made the mention that we have had some wonderful and just dynamic speakers in the last couple of months. I really encourage you to look at our page in the Meetup app and listen to some of those of the past couple months. And we have another one lined up for you tonight. But we also are about building relationships. And this is a little bit more difficult when we're working with people across the country. But in this age of Zoom meetings, we have the opportunity to make those connections, and we can build a network and find a synergy that comes together so that we can share our specialties with one another and have folks that we are comfortable with when it comes to referring somebody. You know, if I'm working with somebody who all of a sudden has a relationship issue, I know that I can refer them to Mike and that he's going to take great care of them. But we are also really looking to associate with individuals who are like-minded, focused on growth, that want to collaborate together, and above all, to celebrate life. So you see there that we are also a positive, proactive, and productive individuals who want a more personal and professional business and life growth. So that is who we are. We do have a presence on social media. We are on Facebook. We're on LinkedIn. We're on YouTube. And you can look at Facebook is at Northwest Coaches Connect. LinkedIn is at Northwest Coaches. And then again, the YouTube is Northwest Coaches Connect. I really encourage you to get there, look us up on LinkedIn with that page. Be sure you follow us on there, and when a post comes up, make sure that you like it, and that helps us just get our group out there a little bit more, and get that going. Okay, so we're back. We've covered the leadership team and introductions, which pretty much covers the majority of folks here. But we have actually, Carl hasn't said a whole lot about who he is, but we'll skip over him, and and let's go to Bob. Bob Dumas, tell us a little bit about you, your coaching practice, and
okay, well, I'm a life coach, a trainer, life coach, trainer, and presenter, and I am working on my website. Don't have it up yet, but it will be called The Examined Life Coaching and Training, based on the Socrates quote about the unexamined life not being worth living. And My wife and I also are marriage coaches for an organization called Marriage Team out of Vancouver, Washington.
Mhm.
And we are also part of the team that trains people to be marriage coaches. So we do that typically in a couple of times a year, where we train groups of people, of course, like most things now, remotely, which has greatly opened up the reach of Marriage Team from what used to be, as you said, typically Northwest,
Mhm.
previously, to now nationwide, and even having some people being trained as marriage coaches internationally. So that has
Great.
been tremendously rewarding and extremely successful results with that program. So that's it for now.
Great. Thank you, Bob. And Leilani, tell us about yourself.
Well, my name is Leilani Saez, and I am a life coach with Natural Capacities Resilience Life Coaching. I help adults with brain fog, focus, and forgetting, adopt brain healthy habits, and develop resilient living mindsets, and eliminate brain shame when that's needed. So basically, I help folks who have brain wiring differences live their lives fully and flourish.
Great.
So glad to be here
Thank
tonight.
you.
Dana, looking forward to listening to you.
Yeah. All right, Carl, it's your turn. Give us a plug for New Vibe.
I have a class coming up the 28th and 29th, and excited. We've got a great group already, and we're looking to change the world. The world needs to be changed, and a conversation with a coach or a therapist can change a person's life forever, because the words that we speak make a difference. They come out of the mind, out of your mouth, into a person's conscious, goes into the subconscious, and it'll percolate, and hopefully it creates an action that will change their lives. So we are needed in this world. All of us here are needed, and we need to go out there and plant seeds for growth, because their success is a good thing. We want people to be successful in their businesses, in their marriages, in society. So this is why we come here. This is my purpose. I'm not here to promote me or one thing. I'm here to promote us, so we can all help each other. And so glad you're here, and I'm ready to listen.
All right. Good word. Thank you, Carl. You know, one thing I didn't have you state, and we kind of caught at the beginning. Most of us are here in the Portland, Oregon area. Annette, myself, Sabrina, Carl. Leilani, are you in the Portland area? Where are you at?
No, I'm in Eugene,
Oh,
Oregon.
That's right. You're in Eugene, and Bob is in Medford.
Mhm.
Yeah, Medford, Oregon. And Mike, I know you're in California, but I don't remember which city you're in.
I'm in near Pismo Beach, California, dead center between LA and San Francisco.
All right. Okay. So, and we have another Californian with us tonight as our presenter. I will get to her introduction after just a couple more comments. Be sure and put your contact information in the chat so that we are able to connect with one another. Be sure also that you have the opportunity to have a piece of paper handy and a pen or pencil and jot some notes and some questions down, because we will have some time after Dr. Girard's presentation to address those questions. And if you want to, you can type those into the chat, and we can then go through those at the close of her talk. So we are just so excited to have Dr. Dana Girard here with us tonight. Her topic is understanding and identifying trauma in today's world. And Dr. Girard is a licensed clinical psychologist in California and a graduate from the California Institute of Integral Studies in San Francisco, where she studied Western psychology and Eastern philosophy. Dr. Girard's most notable achievements are her developmental and managerial experiences as a clinical director for Bay Area nonprofits whose focuses have included diversity, inclusion, education, substance rehabilitation programs, wellness-centered development, intern supervision, management, and community health. Dr. Girard is now in private practice where her therapeutic services include treating trauma. And while she's working with trauma, she discovered that traumatic experiences provided opportunities to awaken dormant character strengths that support resiliency. Subsequently, her approach to working through traumatic experiences is one of post-traumatic growth, which often supports the creation of self-defined success stories. Dr. Girard, we are pleased to have you with us. We've got about 40 minutes for you to share with us. And I am just going to turn it over to you and let you dive in. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for that introduction, and thank you for inviting me to share with you what I've come to learn about trauma and the impact on the brain. I have a PowerPoint presentation. Do I click share the screen to share it? Okay, I think it's up and running. Yeah, it is. Okay. Here we go. There. Okay, can everybody see this okay?
Yes.
Okay. So what I will be talking to you today about is understanding trauma, increasing your awareness of it, identifying the traumatic symptoms, not to turn you into clinicians to diagnose it or to treat it, but to bring more awareness so that you can recognize it when you see it and have a conversation with your client to make an appropriate referral to a mental health clinician. To get started, let's have an experience so that we learn from the inside out, not just the outside in. And this experience, it will be to feel what it's like to walk around with a memory that doesn't seem to be processed, resolved, and put in its place. And we won't be recalling anything that is too big, because we don't want to open something that, we don't have the time to close. But I wanted you to get the sense of what it's like to have a memory that doesn't just come into your awareness, but also impacts the body, just to know how it feels. So I invite you to sit comfortably in your chairs with your spine alert, but not rigid, your hands in a comfortable place wherever they may find comfort, your feet grounded on the floor, your breath falling like a feather into your belly. And if it is safe and comfortable for you, allow your eyes to rest closed. If not, pick a point on the floor or the table to lower your eyes and focus. And as you breathe, allow your mind to go back in time to a time where you might have felt disempowered. For many of us, that time is high school. Just saying that word may evoke memories of being there. It's a time of social expectation, social pressures, uncertainty, identity formation, confusion, and conflict with authority figures. Allow mind to bring forth a memory from high school. Allow mind to make it as vivid as if you were watching a movie. And we'll just be here for a moment. Notice how your body reacts to this memory. Notice your breathing. Notice any twitches you might feel in your body. Notice even the pacing of your heart. Now take a slow, deep breath in through the nose and an even slower breath back out through the nose. And as you breathe in this pattern, allow time to move forward to your graduation. As you continue to breathe, allow the hands of time continue to move forward to an accomplishment in your 20s. And as you continue to move through time, recall another accomplishment in your 30s. Allow your mind to continue to move in this pattern where time moves forward for you. All the way to the point where you discovered this organization. Remembered why you were motivated to join. And notice what you're grateful for being here now. Take a slow, deep breath in through the nose and an even slower exhalation back through the nose. And repeat this pattern twice more as you bring yourself closer and closer to this present moment. And when you're ready, open your eyes or raise your lids and rejoin the circle. Okay. So would anyone like to share what they noticed?
I will.
Okay.
I felt tightness in my
Mm.
chest. It definitely felt like a different state.
Mhm. Definitely. And Leilani, am I pronouncing your name correctly?
Yeah.
Okay. Leilani, on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being it's not that bad, 10 being I got to get out of this memory right now, where were you?
Probably a 6 to 7.
Okay.
Mm.
And if you were at an 8 or 9, what might that feel like in your body?
Probably like I'd want to cry and very heavy.
Mhm. Okay. And that 8 or 9 is exactly what it feels like to have a traumatic memory with you all the time. Imagine trying to work together with a client reaching for a goal, but each time you start to make a move toward a goal that looks anything like the original trauma, there seem to be obstacles in the way, self-sabotaging behaviors. Something's getting in the way. And no matter how much you share the information and the strategies and collaboration and work with the client can even tell you why they can't make that last step. And it's because there's trauma. It's usually because it's trauma that's there. So thank you, Leilani, for your feedback, and we'll go deeper into our conversation. So what happens when trauma is in the brain? Well, the amygdala makes an emotional assessment that there is a threat, enough of a threat to label it a trauma. And anytime that the brain registers trauma, it goes into survival mode. It's not there to trip you up, it's there to protect you. So a survival response would be the 4 Fs. You might have heard 3 Fs, but research says there's more likely a 4th, where there is fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. Fawn is like fainting. And so the brain, through the amygdala, registers a threat and goes into a survival response to protect the organism, one of the 4 Fs. At the same time, adrenaline acts like a branding iron and sears that memory into this part of the brain called the emotional part of the brain, the limbic system, the mammalian part of the brain. What also happens is cortisol and glutamate are released, and it inhibits the rational part of the brain. What I think is fascinating about this process is that the prefrontal cortex on the left side has a Broca-Wernicke's area for understanding language and for the ability to speak language. But when you're frightened, you can't do either one of those. So at best, you may make a sound like, ah, or you may gasp, or if you do try to speak, it sounds like gibberish. It's one of those, it's one of those situations. And if you can get a word out that someone could understand, it's usually a 1-word syllable like a toddler. No. So this part of the brain, the prefrontal cortex, goes offline because cortisol inhibits its functioning. What also happens is cortisol inhibits the hippocampus, so that memory doesn't go through the process of being stored like a non-traumatic memory. It stays present as if it's happening right now. And again, it's not to trip you up, it's to keep you protected. So whatever survival behaviors you did, or whatever the event was that was traumatic, the brain wants to keep it present so that it keeps you safe. So if you ran, if you fought, if you froze or fawned, anything that looks like that event that led you to that survival response in the past, when it looks like it's present again, you're going to react in the same way. Okay. And the cortisol and glutamate also inhibits other parts of the body for processing. There's no digestion. There might be excrement, your bowels and your bladder release, because the processing of that is not needed in the moment. So, and it makes complete sense, because if you think about what's happening right now, the Michael from Halloween, if Michael's coming at you with a knife, wearing a mask, and there's blood on the knife, you don't need the prefrontal cortex going, is that knife? Is that a knife? Is that blood on the knife? Are you trying to kill me? So you don't need the thinking process. You need the mammalian brain that says run. And that's what happens. And you don't have access to this part anyway. So how is that possible that when you are encoding the memory, and because this memory is staying so present with you, even if you have the rational brain to say that this situation is done, I don't need to be frightened, I don't need to be protected, I don't need to remember it anymore, that it stays with you, it's usually because the prefrontal cortex is it only influences 10% of your brain's functioning. So you think you're in control of what's going on and a rational mind, for the most part, that's true. But this part of your brain, the rational part of your brain, is only influencing the rest of your brain by 10%. So, and it processes 40 bits of information simultaneously and consciously. The emotional part of the brain, the limbic part of the brain, influences on average about 90% of the brain's functionings, and it processes 40 billion bits of information simultaneously and unconsciously. So this is the lighthouse. This is the smoke alarm. This is the thing that's always looking for the shoe to fall. And if there's trauma there, then it's always waiting for any cue in the environment that says that event is happening again. And when you have an emotional charge, like a traumatic experience, it hits this part of the brain, and the process that I described about cortisol not allowing you to have access to the rest of the brain, you create what's called, what some people would call flip a lid. So if you take your hand and you think of this as your spine, the base of your palm as the brain stem, so this area right here, and your thumb across the middle of your palm as the limbic part of the brain, and this part, the four fingers, as the prefrontal cortex. When you have an emotional charge that comes from the bottom up, because that's how the brain developed. We developed from reptilian to limbic to the frontal lobes. So there are many more nerves and neurons, synapses, processing that goes bottom up and shoots to the limbic part of the brain. And cortisol comes in and doesn't allow you to have access to the rational part of the brain. You flip your lid, gibberish comes out. You don't have access to okay, what do I do next? Let me think about this. Let me not overreact. You just react. So when you recall a traumatic memory, it's just like recalling any memory, just like the experience we did. Memories are stored in a bodily sensations. Like Leilani was saying, a tightness in the chest, the emotional response, had her reaction been higher, she would have been more tearful. The information comes flooding back. And whatever you did to survive, or whatever you did at that time, let's say you're just a regular memory, whatever you did at that time of the regular memory, you're going to do when that memory comes back, even the most benign memory. And it works the same way with a traumatic memory. Those traumatic memories are stored in the body as sensations, emotional responses, the information, the cues in the environment, how the story went in, the procedural patterns, what you did then to survive, you'll do again to survive. Should any cue in the environment says that event is back. The only thing different between a traumatic memory and a benign memory is that the traumatic memory stays unresolved. It's waiting for the other shoe to fall, and it's there to keep you protected. Now let's imagine that you had a punitive authority figure in high school, and although you know you've graduated, you've gotten married, life has gone on, and you are now working for an organization that you feel that you would like to rise up in the organization, take on more responsibility, maybe just wanting to ask for a raise. Each time you do, you notice that there's some step that you can't get beyond. And you notice that it happens when you try to talk to your boss. There's, suddenly you got to go to your son's little league, or suddenly you got to take on some other tasks. Something happens that gets in the way of you making that approach to the boss. You've tried it many times. You don't know why that keeps happening. You may go to a coach, and a friend may say, hey, I know this wonderful coach that can help you reach those goals. It worked for me. The number gets passed on, the person comes to see you, they're working towards that goal, and the same thing continues to happen. You bring in more strategies, maybe collaboration with your colleagues, but still the client isn't moving beyond that step, or is moving very slowly, or there seems to be something that's getting in the way. Well, when you're working with a client, verbally and through the strategies, even strategies from other therapies, like a therapist would do, you are talking to the prefrontal cortex, this part of the brain. But we're trauma is stored is in the emotional part of the brain. So this is the rational part of the brain. This is the emotional part of the brain. And when there's trauma stuck here, unresolved, unprocessed, and moved into the hippocampus, anything that looks like that trauma, any cue that looks like the trauma, the way you reacted in the past to that trauma is the way you're going to react in the present moment should anything come into your awareness that looks anything like that trauma. And the way that happens is that the thalamus is always scanning the periphery. The thalamus is the way station, sensory way station for information. It sends that information to the amygdala and says, what do you make of this? The amygdala assesses emotionally what that sense is and compares it to the past. And if it feels like a threat, it starts to react. It starts the process of survival as it did in the past. So it lets the hypothalamus know, hey, I need you to mobilize the troops. I need you to get the legs ready. We need to move away from this threat. So imagine this person comes to you, has had this traumatic experience in adolescence with a punitive authority figure, is now in his 40s, is having a difficult time talking to his boss to move forward in his career. And what is probably happening that is the obstacle that's getting in the way is that the thalamus is taking in the cues that this boss is a lot like this, like that punitive authority figure. Ask the amygdala, hey, what do you make of this? Amygdala says, you know what? He does have a mustache like him. You know, his voice, his tone is the same way. He's about that same height. You know, he even kind of looks like that authority figure. And remember how mean that guy was? Oh, no. Hypothalamus, let's not go ask for that raise. Let's go find other things we need to do, maybe even another job. You know what, let's start our own business. So to move away from that threat. So when a traumatic memory is recalled, it's the same, it's just like a benign memory being recalled. All the information that went in to make that memory are recalled when that memory is recalled. And what makes a traumatic memory different from a benign memory is the traumatic memory doesn't get stored into the long-term storage in the hippocampus. It stays active, ready to mobilize for the survival of the organism. And what I think is really interesting is that all the things that go into creating a traumatic memory, the bodily sensations, the emotional responses, the information, the procedural learning are the same symptoms that we see in the diagnosis for trauma. The threat was either directly experienced or indirectly experienced. There is some kind of flashback that is happening cognitively, physically, emotionally. There is an avoidance to the stimuli, whether the stimuli is coming from inside the person or external to the person. There's a change in mood and thought, usually towards the negative. There are changes in arousal and reactivity. A person is on guard for the next shoe to fall, the threat. It functionally impairs them, as I was giving the example. The punitive authority figure looks and acts a lot like my boss, and it makes it difficult for me to ask for that raise or move forward in my life. So there's a functional impairment. And the symptom is not due to some other influence, like a side effect from medication or another disorder. So how do you treat? In other words, how do you update the emotional part of the brain so that it knows, hey, there's nothing to protect against. You're no longer 14 in high school. You're now 40 years old trying to ask your boss for a raise and move forward in your career. Well, if we only try to go through the rational brain, remember, it's not connected to the emotional brain because of cortisol and glutamate severed that. You don't have access to it. You can talk about the trauma. You can talk about how you're 40 years old and working towards, moving forward in your career. But when you try to make that move towards your career, towards that boss, this lights up and you go right back into the past. So a lot of therapies would work through collaboration, talk therapy, to try to resolve the trauma. But the prefrontal cortex, verbal areas, has no connection to the emotional part of the brain. It's not just because of the cortisol, it's just it doesn't connect that way. But it does have a middle part, the area that is between the brows, the medial prefrontal cortex, and it acts as a bridge to the emotional brain. It integrates the information from the prefrontal cortex and carries that information through imagery, symbolism, body language to the emotional brain. But as you notice, from here to here is a very long route. This is also the route of meditation. And there was a study out in Boston where the pathway becomes stronger from the medial prefrontal cortex to the emotional brain when people meditate for 27 minutes a day for 8 weeks. But not everybody's into that or have the time to do that. So this is a much longer route. It doesn't mean that it doesn't, it's not valuable. It's just that it's one route, but it's a long route to updating the emotional brain. And only when the emotional brain is in a calm state could it even do that. Because remember, when there's a trauma here, we don't have access to any part of the prefrontal cortex. So we have to be in a calm state. And this is where therapeutic alliance or a trusting relationship, safe relationship allows you to even touch the trauma that is lying here. So those types of relationships keeps the person calm, allows for the imagery in a particular technique to carry that information here. Still a long route. The other route is, of course, the shortest route, the bottom up. Remember, this is the newest part of the brain. Down here are the oldest parts of the brain. So there are many more synapses, many more connections that are happening down here. And so when we incorporate the body through association, experiences, then we have a bottom-up processing, and it's a shorter route to the emotional brain, and it can update the emotional brain, thereby allowing the process, like a flush, to go into the remaining memory consolidation process of the hippocampus. These are some of the common therapies that use either, well, they use the bottom-up process, and the bottom-up process gets you right to, again, the emotional part of the brain. And the emotional part of the brain works, it updates through imagery, something unexpected. So symbolism or a shift in perspective. Oh, I didn't see that like that. Or a new experience that contradicts the old experience, because the new experience brings new information and contradicts the old experience and the old information. It learns through repetition, and it learns through association. And so these are some techniques that are used to do that. And you might have heard of some of them. You might even have practiced them in your practice for those of you who are or have been therapists. EMDR is eye movement desensitization reprocessing. So it uses bilateral stimulation, the movement of the eyes back and forth, to update the information from the emotional brain to the rational brain. Memory reconsolidation, I think, is really fascinating, because the theory behind that is that memory is where memory is held in the synapses. When you recall the memory and you bring back all those bodily sensations and make that memory as real as it's happening right now, you open those synapses. And by bringing in new information, a shift in perspective, a meaningful conversation, a meaningful process, that, something as simple as that, what did you know about that teacher that was a punitive authority figure? Oh, he was going through a divorce. He had lost his child in a car accident. Now you know more and you understand more about that teacher and why that teacher was the way that it was, that he was. And when you have more information, while that synapses is open, you have a 10-minute to 6-hour window for that synapses to close with that new information, thereby updating the emotional brain. So when you recall the memory now, it's not a traumatic memory, because when you recall it now, you think differently about it, you feel differently about it, and therefore you behave differently about it. And now that I know what was going on with my my coach back when I was in high school, I understand that there could be something going on with my boss. and it has nothing to do with me. And now I can approach him, whereas I couldn't before. Or maybe, you know what, when I really think about it, they aren't exactly alike, other than both of them are in an authority position. Rapid resolution therapy is memory reconsolidation with hypnosis included in it. Psilocybin therapy is microdosing with mushrooms. And what I think the beauty of that one is where you are processing information on a country road, a single country road. When you introduce mushrooms into your therapy, now you've got many pathways. Now you've gone from a country road to a 4-lane highway, and now you've got different ways of getting to the same place. And you have different ways of understanding the pathway there. Brain spotting is a little bit like EMDR in that the therapist is observing the client's eyes moving around the room. And a lot of us don't look directly at each other when we're talking. We gesticulate, we look around. And so the therapist is observing this and watching where the eyes go and what is said at the same time. So a person looking to the left may suddenly go deeper into a story or a situation, become tearful or relieved when they're looking to one side other than another. And so the therapist is tracking that and bringing in mindful processing about what's happening right there, bringing insight and awareness to the client. And therefore you got the medial prefrontal cortex going back to the emotional brain, updating the emotional brain. Somatic experience works with the body. So the theory is that trauma is trapped in the body. So if you wanted to run from a sexual assault, but you couldn't, you froze, and there's all the punishing thoughts that come with that, you might be in a session with a somatic therapist who gets you who invites you to tell the story and then invites you to run around the room. And just in that process, I'm simplifying it, but giving you the gist of the idea of finishing a story to its positive end, not where you were trapped, updates the emotional brain. Movement is like somatic experience, and there's different types of movement. There's sculpting, like being sculpted into the position that you were in when the trauma went in. There's a lot of research around people who have been sexually assaulted and take ownership of their bodies back through dance, through movement, sometimes through things that you would think would be contradictory, pole dancing, burlesque, but they're taking back their own sexuality instead of feeling like it was taken from them. Experientials is another way of working to update the emotional brain through these processes that I had mentioned above the line, where you're back in the story and you're reliving the story, but you're bringing the story to a different ending. It doesn't matter that you're in the room doing a role play around the story. The brain doesn't know the difference. The mind does, rational brain does, but the emotional brain doesn't. Remember, the past is always the present. So if I need to talk to that punitive coach and find out what's going on so that I can talk to my boss, my therapist is that punitive coach and is role playing with me. Or you take a prop from the room that represents that coach or that feeling that you're feeling in your attempt to walk towards that boss or that coach, and you manipulate it out here. Maybe you have a figurine of what that feeling looks like or that coach. You realize that you're much bigger than the size of that figurine. You talk to it, whatever the process would be where you're engaging with something that is outside yourself. When you are able to manipulate it out here, you're able to manipulate it in here, and therefore the brain is updated. Sand play is along those lines. So sand play is a series of figurines that represent life. They're all metaphors for life. You might have little figurines that are a woman with a baby, a man going to work, someone who is running. You could have someone who looks like they've been abused. These figurines come in different places, and you can find them in different ways. And as the client takes the figurine off the shelf, consciously, the therapist is watching for the unconscious reaction and how the figurines are placed into a sandbox and how the client manipulates it and gains insight from it, because now the story is in the sand. I often think of sand play like the figurines are the words and the sand are the pages. And as a person is manipulating the figurines to put them where they feel they are going, they need to go, the story starts to play out. The trauma starts to resolve itself. It's really powerful. The therapist says nothing. The client does all the work with the figurines and the sand. With yoga, there's a lot of research in yoga and its impact on anxiety, depression, and now trauma. But not just any yoga. You want to have a yoga instructor, or sometimes a therapist will also be a yoga instructor and be a trauma-focused or trauma-informed yoga instructor, because there are specific positions that trigger different things in the body. Remember, you're doing a bottom-up processing that can update the brain. And then expressive arts is like sand play, except that the modalities, the items that are used might be clay, it might be paint, it might be drawing. Again, the therapist says nothing. The client's brain does all the work as they're working through whatever part of the story is coming to mind and making sense of it. Yeah. So we've taken a really introductory walk through trauma and the impact on the brain. And I invite you to increase your understanding of trauma, not to make a diagnosis or to treat it, but to become more aware of it so that you know how to see it, how to recognize it, to have a conversation with your client about it so that you can make a recommendation for the client. And you can increase your understanding of trauma through workshops, courses, books, videos, and maybe even your own therapy. Two of the top researchers in the field on trauma is Dr. Peter Levine. He works with somatic experiencing, and Dr. Bessel van der Kolk. He works more with the brain. But this isn't an exhaustive list. These are people who are my go-to because their work resonates with me. But they're often seen in conference, on panels, with collaborative research, with other people in the field. And so by following them, you get more exposure to the people who are collaborating with them. And they always bring the latest research to their books and their workshops. And as you're learning more about trauma, you'll also start to learn more about the techniques that I was just mentioning in the previous slide. And if you know how your client approaches learning best, kinetically, somatically, cognitively, artistically, you can make a more specific recommendation for the client to move towards one of those modalities that I was just mentioning. In some way, they each have one of these components of learning to reach that emotional brain in some combination, and sometimes more towards one than the other. And then I recommend that you create a list of diverse trauma-informed mental health professionals by having a conversation with those about what you've learned, what you'd like to learn from them, how they, what modalities they use. You can create a relationship with them, have a list to refer to your client, talk on an in-depth conversation, again, not to diagnose, but to educate yourself and educate the client on the type of therapists that are out there that are on your list and what they do. It could also be a wonderful way to have a networking opportunity for yourselves, because a lot of trauma-informed mental health clinicians will have clients that are ready to get back into their life, ready to go talk to that boss. Now that I know that I'm 40 and I can ask for a raise, or I can move forward in my life and I'm no longer 14 talking to my coach who's yelling at me all the time. And so you can have this really beautiful networking relationship where you are referring to them when you recognize trauma. They were referring to you when they recognize an opportunity for coaching. So that has been my presentation. I hope that it felt, it landed for you well, and I'm opening the floor for questions. If I think we still have time.
Oh, yeah, we're doing well. You're actually 5 minutes ahead.
Oh, good.
So, wow, such great information that you've given us, and the work on just describing how the brain works has just been tremendous for me. I do want, I was just thinking as you went through the different therapies and such, and when you got to the yoga, I was thinking what immediately came to mind was goat yoga. And how can you not, or how can you deal with a or not deal with a traumatic experience when you have baby goats jumping around on your back and stuff? So that it's just one of those things. My mind kind of works that way.
Yeah.
So Mike, you've got a question or a comment?
Yeah, my question was, so Dana, what type of clients do you mainly work with? Or is it any specific type of trauma or?
Mhm. So I'm going to go back to the modalities. So I work in an integrative way. If I were to put a label on it, I'd say that I am psychospiritual, experiential, expressive arts, mindfulness-based therapist. So I work with the expressive arts, the sand play, the experientials, and some somatic experiencing, and a lot of memory reconsolidation. And it used to be that trauma was thought to be a big T trauma, earthquake, sexual assault, robbery, and little T trauma, high school flashback, high school bully flashback kind of thing. But where my training comes from, trauma is trauma. And so working with this modality, knowing the neuroscience behind it, I work with clients who are experiencing blocks in their lives and they can't quite understand why it's still there.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Leilani.
That was actually related to my question, Dana. I've been wondering whether when someone who works with trauma, do you deal with it differently, whether it's you can point to a specific episode or if it's a pattern of incidences that created the trauma, like are they approached differently or just kind of all the same? I mean, I can imagine it must be harder to actually pinpoint where the issue is if it's really diffuse and everywhere. And then wondering, how do you know that you've helped the person release it? I'm just curious about how they differ or are the same.
So sometimes trauma is episodic, it's a one and done. Memory consolidation is a really good therapeutic tool for that. But sometimes because of the way the emotional brain works through association, trauma is sticky. So one trauma could become another trauma because the first one was unresolved, almost like a secondary trauma.
Oh yeah.
You also, there are some people who have had a traumatic life. And so the trauma never ended. It was one episode after another, a person who had a parent who was addicted to substances, or an abusive parent with their own unresolved trauma of abuse. Not that it always happens that way, but sometimes it does. So when you are working with the brain and the emotional part of the area, the thalamus picks up all the cues in the environment that went into the encoding of that trauma. And even though the client only recalls a few of the incidences, a few of the cues, when you work to resolve that, when the client, let's say the guy who wants to go and ask his boss for a raise, when he goes in to ask for a raise, he doesn't realize that, well, let me back myself up. It's still difficult for him. So there's some cue in the past and the present that's there that we still didn't touch on. Something else is going on. And it can be something as simple as there was a case where the person had bought a house, had resolved her trauma in reaching for that goal, and was finally a homeowner. And when she went into her bathroom, there was a pink toilet, and she started immediately becoming nauseous and wanting to vomit. Hadn't come up before, But as she goes back to her therapist to say, you know, I got this house and I'm on my way, but I can't go into my bathroom. The therapist, you know, goes back into the story that was originally resolved and finds out, oh, that's the piece that was missing, that the trauma, the sexual assault happened in the bathroom where there was a pink toilet.
Mm.
So the past can come back to the present moment that fast, just knowing that cue. But if the therapist didn't have that piece of the story, then that didn't get incorporated into the updating of the brain. But once you have it, then you can update the brain.
Wow. So if I'm hearing you correctly, it sounds like trauma is not only deep, but can be wide too,
Yes.
because
and
of the
have-
associations.
Yes,
Wow.
because
Okay.
the emotional brain learns through associations.
Hmm. Thank you for not only explaining that, but also all those techniques, because I didn't realize how they were connected and how they might offer specific remedies.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
definitely if I was going to refer somebody who needed help with trauma, I would want to have a better understanding of the playing field. So thank you. I appreciate
Yeah.
that.
You're welcome.
Yeah, this is incredible work. But you know, we live in a broken world.
Yeah.
Life is broken. Nothing's perfect, and really, we're all traumatized. No
Mhm.
one is exempt from trauma. Now, there's different levels, yes, and I think all of us need to be able to speak to it to some way. And I think as a professional, the therapeutic profession, the coaching industry itself, we need to understand the neurosciences.
Yeah.
You know, the survival brain, the emotional brain, the thinking brain. I mean, not that you have to have a PhD in it or but you know, get information. There's a lot of great books out there.
Mhm.
And I think we owe it to ourselves to be informed on these topics of the brain. Because really, if you think about this, if you think we're looking at Dana with our eyes, we're not really looking at her with our eyes. We're looking at her with our brain. The incredible information we heard, we didn't hear it from our ears, we heard it from our brain. I mean, everything is brain stuff. It just is. So educating yourself on the brain is so vital. So this is incredible work, Dana. I really love this. You were so clear in your explanation, and I felt I was in a class sitting in the front seat. To the professor, it was incredible. I love you being here and sharing this information with us. Now, I want to ask you this question: have you heard and he's written some great books on the brain. It's called Dr. Daniel Amen. Have you heard of him?
Yes, I see him often on PBS.
PBS. Yeah, he's a
Yeah.
lot. I
Mhm.
love his work.
Yeah.
And he's got every topic on the brain. He's even got a book called Sex on the Brain. Not that I've studied that, okay? Okay, so no judgment now, okay? But you know, he talks about these experiences of life and how they impact the brain, and even the whole sexual experience of a human, and the impact of the brain. So all of this stuff is so great information. Daniel Amen is one of my favorite guys. He does a lot of brain scanning,
Mhm.
and he's actually got a clinic here in Portland, over in Hillsborough. He has a clinic in San Francisco. Has a clinic in Southern Cal. He's getting all these clinics, but he's a well-known author. I encourage you to look at his material. It's good material. One of the reasons why I liked him so much, he graduated from the same college I went to, Vanguard, Newport Beach, California. So, you know, old homie here. But this is just fascinating work to help the world be better and healthier.
Yes, I agree. And with these modalities, that are on the screen now for updating the emotional brain as they do, what we find is that to answer Leilani's last part of her question, how do you know, when it's no longer, when the traumatic memory has been processed into the hippocampus, and therefore the emotional brain has been updated, the triggers that were triggers are no longer triggers. And if the person had been diagnosed with, if the person had been diagnosed with a form of trauma, these symptoms begin to subside.
Mhm.
What about fitness, exercise? I really believe fitness is a healing device. I mean, for me, I go to the gym and it's therapy for me. I'm in a therapeutic setting when I'm in a weight room or when I'm on my treadmill and it just seems like it brings me this sense of peace and it calms my brain. And so when you mentioned yoga up there and meditate, these are, Eastern religions or Eastern philosophies, but I think how they can also intermix into the Western approach too of healing. I think there's a lot to be said about these components to help us. So go ahead.
Absolutely. There has been comparative research on the different types of exercise and their impact on mood disorders. Weightlifting has had the greatest impact on depression. My thinking is, one, you're not focused on what's depressing you.
Right.
Two, you're focused on your breathing, so there's more oxygen to the brain. You're moving the body, so there's a bottom-up processing to the emotional brain. You're seeing results, just in the circumference of your muscles. And imagine if the trauma had been a sexual assault, or if the trauma had been a bullying incident when you were a younger kid, seeing yourself getting stronger. Now you've got an image of self, and that is being carried by the medial prefrontal cortex to the emotional brain to update.
Yeah.
Seth, Bob, you've got a question.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Girard, so much for your presentation. Really appreciate it. I was thinking in terms of moving forward, you've reprocessed, resolved trauma. Do you see a certain type of, I don't know how to put this exactly, but personality that somebody who is abusive or even predatory preys on? And so a person is more predisposed to be subjected to some sort of abuse or trauma. And there's updating the emotion, but then is there any work on or with the person to, I don't know if you'd say address that and make them more trauma proof?
That's a really good question. We're all vulnerable to something. We're vulnerable to mood disorders, diseases, viruses, health conditions. So mental health is no different than a physical health. But that's one part of the story. That's the nature part of the story. The nurture part of the story is being in an environment that preys on that type of vulnerability. And if you take, and most studies will conclude that try to be nature versus nurture, they often come to the same place, that it's an interaction. It's nature and nurture working together. So a person vulnerable to whatever they're vulnerable to is in a situation that brings that vulnerability out. And meaning making plays a really big role as well. One of the one of the books that I've read is the Gift of Fear, and how when people have been in a traumatic situation, they are aware of the cues that were in the environment, the red flags that were there that said, you know, I shouldn't do X, Y, and Z, but their rational brain overrode the amygdala. So they go into these situations, maybe because they're vulnerable, maybe they see themselves as that type of a person. I don't want to use the word victim, but that's often one that's used in our language. See themselves a perpetual victim. I've always been a victim. I came from an abusive relationship, you know, in my childhood. I went through high school. I was bullied. I got into an abusive relationship with, you know, a boyfriend, a husband, and you know, on and on and on. So this is how I see myself. So I'm going to override my rational thinking that says otherwise, because this is who I believe myself to be. And then we're, you know, in a traumatic situation. The Gift of Fear talks about how to have a stronger relationship with that part of your brain, those cues in the environment that tells you otherwise and keeps you more protected than not. I'm a big believer in meaning making. Some of you might have heard of the cognitive triad. On any angle of an isosceles triangle, and you look at it that way, there is a thought, there is an emotion, and there is behavior. So how I perceive myself or the world, the stories I tell myself that rise up within myself, how I recall the stories, how I interpret them, I'm going to have a certain feeling about them. And the reason why you have an emotion is to get you to move toward or away from something. So now I have a behavior. So if I see myself as someone who is abused and a victim, then I'm going to feel a certain way about that. I don't deserve to be safe. I don't deserve to be in healthy situations. I'm going to move towards those situations that confirm that.
Yeah,
Wow.
it makes me
Powerful.
think of just the other day I was doing a presentation and one of the people in the group said they were not creative. And my feeling about that is that we were all born creative, and somewhere along the line you were told that, and then
Yes.
she just you know this is who she is now, and trying to get them to see themselves. Matter of fact, I showed the I don't know if you've seen that Dove Beauty sketches on YouTube, where a forensic artist draws people. They describe themselves to him and he draws them. He doesn't see them. And then the stranger who spent just a little bit of time describes them. And the stranger's description and his sketch accordingly are generally gentler, softer, more pronounced on the features that are in some way, I guess you'd say, beautiful, whereas the person themselves focused on things in a much more negative light. And oftentimes it's another person who can see us differently that then we realize we have work to do on ourselves.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, and as I was describing the interaction of nature and nurture towards the negative, it also works that way towards the positive. If you see yourself as an empowered person, you're more likely to feel empowered and more likely to move in behaviors that are empowering. Yeah. When I work with clients who experience trauma, I often look for what went well, what they did right. Even if they had to get into a fetal position to protect themselves, they protected themselves. They may not see it that way until we are talking and walking through the story. And now I have shared some information that is unexpected, a shift in perspective. Maybe I have the person in that fetal position where they're bringing it all back. And now there's a shift in perspective. I'm protecting myself, not I'm weak, I'm vulnerable, I'm taking this abuse on. So I often will look for people, and in listening to the story, I'm listening for the strengths, and I'm looking for what went, I don't want to say right, but what felt positive, the character strengths that come out of that. And I often will identify them with the client. And I have a whiteboard that I used to, when I was in my office, I have a whiteboard, but a lot of times it's a piece of paper and when working remotely, but to identify, to catch them, those pearls, and create a necklace with them so that the client has a shift in perspective and the emotional brain can be updated. That actually it was not that it was all bad, but that there were some things that were positive, some things that were strengths that came to the surface that wouldn't otherwise come to the surface had you not had that traumatic experience. It is the art and the science and the nuance in that conversation to see it that way. But I let people know through the interactionist method of I come to the table with certain genetic expressions, and they're only expressed when I'm in a certain situation. And in that case, the character strengths will rise up. And so using that and applying it to whatever the situation is, now we have post-traumatic growth rather than post-traumatic stress disorder.
Wow. This has been so good. I think the discussion afterwards was just as interesting as the presentation, Dr. Girard. I know for me, I really liked your distinction or removing the distinction between the big T and the little t.
Yeah.
And recognizing that we have trauma, as Carl pointed out, we all have trauma. And I know that there are triggers that I still deal with in regards to my father, alcoholic situation. He was non-attentive, and such. So I've had to process that. And there are still times when a certain situation kicks me back into that trauma. And to have an explanation for that really helps. I appreciate that so much. So you mentioned the book. What was the name of the fear?
Oh, The Gift of Fear.
The Gift of Fear. So might want to check that out. Dr. Girard also has mentioned another book when she and I were talking that she highly recommends. I've got it with me, and if you'll stop your sharing, Dr. Girard, we will move ahead with our giveaway for tonight, because the giveaway is this book. Let me see if that's gonna, okay. Let me just throw this up here. It is the War in the Soul by Edward Tick, PhD. I've had the opportunity to kind of peruse through this, and this is an amazing book. And I hope the spinner lands on my name tonight, because I really want to dig into this. But some of this, while it was based on PTSD from veterans and coming out of the war situation, there's so much in here that can apply to anybody who's gone through trauma. And so it talks about the soul in war is the first part of the book. The second part is from myth to reality. It talks about the soul of a nation, eros and aesthetics in hell. That was an interesting chapter. There's then it talks about the third part is the long road home, talking about what Leilani was asking about. How do you know when you're on the road home? And looking at the healing power of storytelling. And a chapter that, of course, really stood out for me was War in Religion and Spirituality, and how religion and spirituality can help address issues of trauma. And I realized that I didn't click on the sound button, so we don't have the cheering tonight.
Oh.
Sorry, folks.
That's like the best part.
Okay, we'll do it again here. Whoops. Let me get back. Share screen, share sound. There we go. All right, here we go. And it looks like Annette Mulligan, the
Wow.
proud new owner of this book.
Thank you, thank you.
We have a winner. All right, Annette, we'll connect so I can get this book to you. Dr. Girard, I wanted to make sure that if you would, please put your contact information in the chat so that if somebody wants to connect with you to follow up on this discussion, they're able to do so. And then also, just make sure that, you know, it doesn't do any good to sit here through this meeting and have everybody put their contact information and you not save it. So be sure you click on the 3 buttons in the message section and click save the chat so that you have that there on your computer and you can go back to it. Well, I believe that Annette is going to share with us a bit about what next month's speaker is going to be about. We're going to meet again on November 15th. So Annette.
We are, and we are going to hear from Dana Neeland. And Dana talks about, I mean, we've already mentioned it tonight so many times, but storytelling. And here are 3 things that Dana will be bringing to our meeting. Why storytelling is such a powerful way to reach the hearts of your listeners. When and where you can use storytelling to market your business as a coach. And 5 core stories that every coach should learn to tell. And then also a 3-step process that will help you to become a story-inspired coach. So I am really looking forward to that already. I'm just like, I have so many questions before she even presents on what does that mean? So I am really looking forward to that and our next meeting next month. So I want to encourage those of you who get the invites from Meetup, and the minute you get it, start sharing it, start putting it all over your social media so that others who are coaches can also join with us so we can have, you know, more people who know more about these wonderful, wonderful topics that we discuss. So thank you, Richard.